All right, Brewers fans, you have heard me babble on and on about what the Milwaukee Brewers should do, what they shouldn't do, how their offseason has gone, what their outlook for 2023 has gone. But how about we get some thoughts from an outsider who covers all of Major League Baseball? My friend and host of the Bullpen Podcast, Adam Kunos, joins me next. Stay tuned in. You are Locked On Brewers.
You are Locked On Brewers, your daily Milwaukee Brewers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Brewers fans, welcome back into the Locked On Brewers podcast. Thank you for always making Locked On Brewers your first listen each and every day. Do not forget, we are free and available on all podcast platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify. Of course, there are probably about 100 others, but go ahead and leave us a review on any one of those platforms you choose to use. And you can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Brewers. You can follow us on Facebook now. Get all of our daily content up there on your news feed at Locked On Brewers Podcast on Facebook. And then, of course, on YouTube, where you guys have absolutely been smashing the subscribe button. We are just, I believe, last time I looked, right around 70 subscribers away from 1,000. So thank you to each and every one of you. If you have not subscribed, please go ahead and check that out. Hit that subscribe button. Just search Locked On Brewers. I am your host. By now, you should know my name. About 4 weeks. I haven't been fired yet, so we're still here. I am your host, Brandon Snide. I tell you guys, I saw a couple reviews on the podcast. One guy said it sounds like a fan talking. That's exactly what I am. I am a diehard, lifelong Milwaukee Brewers fan. I am born and raised here in Milwaukee. I'm actually recording this podcast with my friend Adam, who is down in Florida, but I am in Milwaukee, of course, just minutes away from American Family Field. You should know it. I know it. It's home to our Milwaukee Brewers. You can find me on Twitter at Brandon_Snide. And as always, really, really appreciate you allowing me to steal some of your time to talk about our Milwaukee Brewers. As always, Locked On Brewers is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As I mentioned before, my good friend and host of the Bullpen Podcast, where Adam can correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure is available wherever you get your podcast. He covers every Major League Baseball team, talks about the league in whole. We were just chatting before the show started about the difficulties of an off-season baseball podcast. So let's bring him in. Adam, welcome. How are we doing?
Doing good, Brent. Thank you very much for having me on. And yeah, I agree. Off-season is probably the worst time to do a baseball designated podcast. Yes, you have moves, but you have this gap period around maybe Christmas, New Year's, where no deals are getting done.
Just
and you're just sitting there going, it's just going, and dirt is now being laid in the field. We'll go with that as our main headline.
You know, I tell people, I talked about it yesterday. I had Connor Newcomb on. We did a crossover for the Locked On Brewers and the Locked On Orioles. And I said, you know, the only real good thing that helps me, and you don't have this problem, Adam, but some of us do up here in the Midwest. And when it's cold, you know, when it's cold and it's dreary, it's dark by like 4:30. It's cloudy like 8 out of 7 days a week. And you just want to talk about something that makes you feel warm and happy and look forward to summer. And that's baseball. But you live in Florida, so you have that beautiful weather almost pretty much year round. The summers are I've lived in South Georgia. They're fun if you're in the water and you got a drink in your hand. But how's the off season down in Florida for you?
You know, off season it's beautiful. We're talking 70s constantly. We do get this time. I mean, Christmas we were down to 30s, 40s. We did have that nice little cold. I mean, I'm walking around in a hoodie and shorts. I mean, but no, it's something about being in Florida around the offseason because we know we're itching for spring training when we get the teams coming down to Florida. I mean, I live in Central Florida. Yep. So I have the Tigers down in Lakeland. I have all the teams around the coast that I can go travel to. So, I mean, it's just something cool to look forward to while you're in Florida.
Now, for those that are on video, you can see this. If you're not on video, you can hear this. But Adam's talking to me with a Chicago Bears and a Chicago Bulls banner in the background. So I'm gonna have to use my editing skills after the show to no, I'm just kidding. I'm giving you a hard time. Football season's over for both of us. Basketball season, you know, the Bucks are kind of up and down. The Bulls kind of up and down as well. We're not going to talk about that, all that good stuff. We'll talk about some baseball. And Adam, you're an outsider, right? When I say outsider, I mean non-Brewers. When people hear me talk, they know I'm a Brewers fan. They know I'm biased. They know I'm opinionated. You kind of can ride the middle here because you're a non-Brewers fan, but you cover the league as a whole. You know, you get on a podcast and you talk about every major league team, every big news. I'm curious your point of view, Adam, on the Milwaukee Brewers thus far 2023 offseason.
Very quiet. I was expecting them to be more of a splash. I mean, we did see some of these big deals, some 10-plus year deals, multi-million-dollar deals going down. I didn't expect the Brewers to make that kind of deal because they are a very small to mid-market team coming out of the Midwest. I mean, and I'll say I love watching Milwaukee games. I've been to 2 games live, one at County Stadium, one at Miller Park at the time.
Dropping the County Stadium reference.
I know. That was back in the 90s before they were still American League Central. But the Brewers have been a very quiet but consistent offseason. I think they've made some small moves here and there that keep them in pace with the Cardinals because you win the division, you're the target on the back of everyone else in that division. The Brewers knew that for the last couple of years, have been consistently a playoff team from 2018 to 2022. They kind of ran away with the Central back in 2021 like the White Sox did. Once they got a hold of the Central, they just never let that go. So, but one move I did like that they made was bringing Abraham Toro from Seattle. I think even though he has been very inconsistent being with Houston, Seattle, I think he should see a rebound season in Milwaukee. I think that's going to be a good fit for him. He's not really a veteran player, but he has some experience to kind of teach that young Milwaukee crew that you now have coming up in that system.
Where do you think he's more comfortable, second or third?
I would keep him at second base. I keep him.
And that's what I thought too. So I had Ben Ranieri, who covered Seattle on earlier about a month ago. He covered Seattle last year, and he mentioned Toro as well. So it's intriguing that you're the second person to name drop him. Obviously, he name dropped him because that trade had just went down for Colton Wong. But that's interesting that you mentioned Toro's name. Would that be you don't want to say your biggest surprise for the Milwaukee Brewers offseason so far, but outside of maybe Toro having a rebound year, what was your biggest surprise for the Brewers offseason?
I would say obviously bringing back Wade Miley just his last couple of days was a big surprise. I didn't think Milwaukee would bring him back. I mean, I'm glad they did. I think he'll be a good fit for that rotation, kind of keep him, I would say, middle rotation, not necessarily your opening day start, but maybe your 2-3 starter. Sure. I do like William Contreras. Obviously, the Contreras brothers, you got them in the same division again, so you're going to be kind of competing against them. But I think Toro is probably my biggest splash for the Brewers, and I like what they did with him because I think he's going to feel comfortable in that system. Craig Counsell, I think, can work with him, get him comfortable being in that system, keep him at second. I would keep him middle 4-5 in the lineup, not necessarily keep him in that leadoff spot, but kind of keep him middle lineup where he can be that RBI guy that I think Milwaukee's looking for.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at the offseason thus far, the Wade Miley becoming the first major league contract free agent wise for the Milwaukee Brewers. And then I think when you're looking at an offseason that when I started this podcast, I always said had more questions than answers. Some of them have been answered. I think William Contreras, look, an OPS of 138 last year, which is 10 points higher than his brother Wilson, who's what you mentioned, a St. Louis Cardinal, which, God, man, I wanted him out of the division so bad. What about, let me get your thoughts real quick before we transition here. What are your thoughts on the Jesse Winker? Now, he was part of you mentioned Abraham Toro, so I'm curious about Jesse Winker. You are familiar with him being in Cincinnati and just in 2021, an all-star, absolutely destroyed the cover of the baseball. He destroys National League Central teams. He mashes at American Family Field. What are your thoughts on Winker? Do you see him having a possible rebound? He's obviously due for an unrestricted free agent season after this year, so there's some incentive there for him to have a good year.
I agree. I think there's definitely incentive for him to have a good year. He knows what he's playing for because he's coming up into a contract year. He knows he has to have a good year. If he has a average year or below average year, he's going to miss out on a good payday. So he has to have a good year. I'm not saying career year, but he has to be at least 20 home runs, 75 RBIs, to at least get a contract offer from not the Brewers, but draw interest from other teams around the league.
Sure. And real quick before we transition, I know I already said that, but we're going to go. I got one more question that just popped into my head. So you mentioned Wade Miley, you mentioned Toro, we mentioned Winker, we mentioned Contreras. Has there been a letdown for you if you're looking at the Milwaukee Brewers franchise? Has there been a letdown of where you're just looking at this team and you're like, man, the pitching is just so darn good. Tevin Williams is one of the best. MLB had him as the number 3 reliever in baseball just the other day. You talk about the former Cy Young winner, Corbin Burns, in 2021. Brandon Woodruff's about as good of a 2-starter as you're going to see. Freddie Peralta's probably as good as a 3-starter as you're going to see. And they're just a piece or two away. Do you look at these Brewers? Because I'm telling you right now, Adam, and you know this, covering baseball and being around Twitter Brewer fans, it's a frustrating part of our offseason because we feel like we have the core, but there just hasn't been that piece to be added. But maybe Contreras is that piece. Maybe Winker motivation can be that piece. Maybe you're going to see a guy like Toro. They're going to play their younger guys, right? They're going to play their Bryce Terrains, Garrett Mitchell. We've seen him up here last year. But have you looked at this Brewers roster, looked at this offseason, like if only they just did this 1 or 2 things, I could really see them take off?
This is very interesting because I did peek at the roster today, and you may disagree with me on this. Andrew McCutchen. I think they should have held on to Andrew McCutchen at least for a DH spot because.
Well, I think Winker's going to be there. DH.
Well, I mean, you can rotate Winker and McCutchen on a DH.
Well, then they have Keston here to figure out too, because they got to figure him out because I don't know where he's going to play defensively. And Fangraphs has Hira and Winker splitting the DH spot. Now, whether or not that happens, time will tell. But that's kind of where the early projection is now.
Yeah, but for some reason, I liked McCutchen with that team last year as a possible 4th outfielder, filling that DH. He brought a good clubhouse vibe, and I think that's something that I think Milwaukee needs is a good clubhouse presence. I mean, he has the veteran experience being in Pittsburgh, in Philadelphia, San Francisco for a brief moment. And again, you may disagree with me on this. I like McCutchen in that Brewer uniform. I think it was a good fit for him. I'm kind of sad that he didn't have a good year for Milwaukee. He kind of have a down year. But I wish they would at least give him at least one more chance, bring him in, and if it didn't work out, trade him halfway through the season.
Yeah, I think, in the offseason still, there's still time. We've seen the Brewers in March, even closer to April, make some late adjustments to their roster. So it wouldn't shock me to see them make another move going down. But we'll digress on the Brewers offseason thus far because, quite frankly, as of we were talking about before the show, there just isn't really a whole lot of news. But there is news throughout Major League Baseball. And, baseball fans, the Carlos Correa saga finally comes to an end as he inks a 6-year, $200 million deal with the Twins. We're going to break that down because that has been a interesting storyline for Major League Baseball. So we'll talk about that. It's just been a wild offseason for him. I'm going to ask Adam about that ordeal, plus get his thoughts on other deals that went down over the course of this offseason. Oh my goodness, this is going to hurt to say this. I may give credit to the Chicago Cubs. We'll see how I feel towards the end of the podcast. But first, I have to tell you guys about, speaking of friends, the Cubs are not my friends, but my good friends over at BetOnline.net they are your number one source for betting sports info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there. From pro football, we are in the playoffs, baby. The Packers are not, but the other teams are. The Bears are not either, Adam. But there's also college basketball coming up. There's all kinds of stuff. March Madness is right around the corner. They've got it all at betonline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, again, your number one rule here, ladies and gentlemen, is you need to love this podcast first, but you can find the rest of those at betonline.net as well. They are always the fastest and easiest way to get your sports betting info. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. Bet online, where the game starts. Thank you for making Locked On Brewers your first listen. For your next listen, check out the Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he is going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. Welcoming Adam Kunos into the show, host of the Bullpen Podcast, which covers all of Major League Baseball, unlike this podcast where we just cover specifically one team, and that's the way it's going to go down for the course for the foreseeable future. But Adam covers all of them. Adam, let's start with this. You do cover all of the teams, like I just mentioned. Your thoughts on the wild, unpredictable, and sometimes unimaginable offseason for Carlos Correa, who was looking for a major payday. He still got a major payday, but first inks a deal with San Francisco for 13 years, $315 million. Then he goes, something happened with the medical concern. Then he goes to the Mets and has a monster deal with them. And then he ends up back with the Twins on a 6-year, $200 million deal. And it's, has the ability to climb. I believe it's up to 270, some incentives in there, but it's been a wild offseason. We're going to start with Carlos Correa. It finally comes to an end. What are your thoughts on the offseason for him thus far?
Yeah, I mean, three-ring circus sounds more like it, just the way he kind of been dragging it down. So, yeah, I talked about this on Monday where he opted out of a 3-year deal with Minnesota. And first, a lot of people were shocked that he actually went to Minnesota after his deal with Houston. Everyone thought he was going to stay with Houston. He's going to sign a max deal with New York, Mets, San Diego. 1 year in Minnesota, not necessarily a stellar year, but I thought that when the deal with the Giants came out that, okay, the Giants are going to be spending, but then we get the news about his leg injury, like this pending leg injury that he's been nagging since his minor league days. That deal falls through. Then we get the Mets. My brother-in-law texted me, hey, we got a deal. He's a Mets fan. I got to hear that now.
Did you see Steve Cohen broke his wrist to tell his kid, I think it was his kids, that he signed Correa? I mean, that's insane.
I mean,
that's crazy. I just saw that yesterday. That's absolutely wild.
I'm tempted to follow him on Twitter just for the laughs.
I felt terrible. I mean, he's a billionaire and whatever, but it's like, oh my goodness.
But yeah, then he goes with New York, and then I credit the Twins for taking this risk because this is a huge risk in signing Correa to at least a 7-year deal. I mean, it's not the money he wants, but he is getting a good max deal. But this is such a huge risk for Minnesota because they're taking on so much risk in his health. There's no guarantee that this leg injury is going to be fully 100%. I'm still thinking that there's still going to be nagging injury. He was in a walking cast over Christmas. I mean, there was pictures tweeted out on Twitter that he was in a walking cast over the holidays.
Okay.
So, I mean, the Twins are taking a really big risk. They're competing with both the Guardians and the White Sox for the AL Central. They kind of started off hot last year. They were holding the lead in Central, then kind of fell off at the end of the year. I have a lot of questions. This deal has more questions than answers right now. I think we're going to find out more about that during spring training when he arrives in camp and see how healthy he is, how much practice time he gets, how many games he gets in before the regular season. So I want to wait till spring training so I fully have a good, deep analysis about how good this deal is for him and Minnesota.
Speaking of shortstops, we'll keep it at the position, and I agree with you. Well, you hope everything's okay with him medically and that he's able to be the player that he once was. And credit to Minnesota, right? Buxton's on his cheap deal right now. They saw an opportunity, they capitalized, and I'll never discredit a team for going out there and spending money, especially for a fan base that is just starving for a successful team because a new ballpark, we're fairly new ballpark out there. My uncle lives out there. He absolutely loves that ballpark. So yeah, we'll see what happens with that. But speaking of that position, I mean, I want you to talk me through this shortstop position, Adam, okay? Because we have a dilemma here in Milwaukee. At some point, we have about, I think it's 2 years left of Willy Adames, who the Brewers acquired in a trade in 2021. But this offseason, for whatever reason, has exploded the shortstop market. Dansby Swanson, Trey Turner, Xander Bogaerts. We talked about Carlos Correa. I'm probably missing one or two off the top of my head, but over $1 billion in money committed for that position into 2023. I mean, it's insane. I mean, the money in Major League Baseball is we all know it's, sky high. We'll talk in a minute about the revenue that was just reported, but holy cow, what happened to the shortstop market this offseason?
I mean, your guess is good. Mine was just the amount of dollars that are being thrown out just for those three players alone. I mean, you look at shortstop, they're kind of the captain of the infield. They do control the infield. They set up the defense. They kind of move people around. So they kind of have control of the whole infield from where their positions, because they're not covering base. They have a tendency to, before the shift rule got implemented, to shift around the entire infield. With Swanson, Bogaerts all being signed, I mean, you have Tim Anderson who's coming on to his last deal with the White Sox, so he could be looking at max deal with Chicago or somewhere else. I hope it's with Chicago, me personally, but it's just crazy how this market for at least infielders have exploded. And we saw this a couple of years ago with Manny Machado, Bryce Harper all getting these max deals, and we thought that maybe we'll have this one off season where these deals will kind of slow down, but each year it's just one after another. We see these deals that overlap each other's. just insane about how they're crying for, oh, we're not making money. We have to look at revenue sharing, but we're going to shell out $6 billion for 2 players.
Well, and the Padres they're wild, man, because they're kind of, they're right there with Milwaukee as far as market size. They're coming in, I believe, at the 26th smallest market, or 26th largest market. The Brewers are at 27th. I know they're a bigger city. San Diego is obviously closer to bigger cities, and they have a bigger, reach of fans, but they've offered multiple $400 million contracts this offseason. Turner was one that was reported. Obviously, they land Bogarts. They also offered Aaron Judge over $400 million. He ultimately signs back in with the New York Yankees. But it's these owners are just, it's good to see. I like seeing it. Let me get your thoughts real quick, because now we're talking about it. Now it's coming to my head. Do you want to see a salary cap in baseball?
I actually kind of want to see a salary cap, because I think it's not necessarily taken away from the game, but it's almost like an advantage to these luxury teams, the Yankees, Red Sox, Dodgers, teams that can afford these, the Mets, who have owners that can shell out this much money. You look at teams like Brewers, Padres, Marlins, Rockies, Diamondbacks, the Rays, even though the Rays, for some reason, who have one of the smallest budgets, still put a competitive team on the field and can still outplay these teams that are spending billions of dollars each year. I would like to see a salary cap in place in baseball. I think it would be good for the game. I think it'll be more of a competitive field. And not to say that it's not a competitive field. Baseball hasn't had a repeat World Series winner since 2000, and that trumps all the big 4 leagues. I'll even throw Major League Soccer in there as well, a repeat champion. So,
yeah, and we'll talk about the baseball revenue reporting record-breaking numbers for 2022. $10.8 billion, which beat out the old record, which was set in 2019, not too far down the line, at $10.7 billion. The renewals with Fox, renewals with TBS and ESPN. Are you coming off, 2 years post-COVID? Are you shocked by that record-breaking revenue of $10.8 billion for the league?
A little, yeah, because
I am. It surprised me.
Yeah, I'm surprised, because when you started 2021, you had stadiums reopening with limited capacity with fans. You had some stadiums who did full-on capacity, and then you slowly saw them get back to full capacity. I went to a Rockies game in July when I was out in Colorado, and it was, I believe, 75% capacity at the time. But now you're seeing stadiums with full-on capacity. Sure. You have baseball now turning to jersey ads, which is going to bring in more revenue. You have ads on fields now. You have more ads placed in logos. So it's not saying that you should see this coming. Other sports have gone this route with just advertisement. It's just the way of the sports business. It's an ever-evolving business, and baseball is trying to keep up with the times. And the one thing is ads. You need to sell more ads to make more revenue.
Here's what I got for Commissioner Manfred. Stop playing playoff games in the middle of the day on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. That irked me. The Brewers weren't in the playoffs. It doesn't matter. But I shouldn't be watching, a division series at 2:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday afternoon when most people are at work.
I'll say it makes work really hard to keep concentrating on.
Yeah, or else you ain't getting any work done. But we'll digress on Commissioner Manfred. We could sit here and do a whole week worth of show. But the National League Central, Adam, has been a dogfight the past couple of seasons, really back to 2012, because it's either been won by the Chicago Cubs, the St. Louis Cardinals, or the Milwaukee Brewers. Those are the only 3 teams in the past almost decade that have won the NL Central. I'm curious where those teams stand. I want to get some of your thoughts on their offseason. I'm also going to ask you who you think wears the NL Central crown coming in October. Adam, the National League Central has been a wild division in baseball the past 3 seasons. We have seen, like I mentioned before, 3 different winners over the course of the last decade: the Cubs, the Cardinals, and of course the Milwaukee Brewers. Let's start with the Cardinals, the St. Louis Cardinals. What are some of your thoughts on the offseason they have had thus far? Haven't been too busy, but I don't think they necessarily need to be. So what are some of your thoughts on the St. Louis Cardinals thus far?
Well, like I said, I don't think they necessarily need to be a big splash in the offseason. You have the reigning MVP in Paul Goldschmidt, who had just a fantastic season last year. He finally gets that MVP. He's been MVP candidate ever since he came into the league with Arizona in 2011.
Hated that trade when he went there. God, I hated that trade.
If you don't know, I also cheer for Diamondbacks, so I was upset when he left the desert. I loved him in Arizona. But then
and they didn't do, and it wasn't even a good trade for the Diamondbacks.
No, it wasn't. They got
terrible.
They got the worst end of that deal. But then you bring on Arenado from Colorado,
which was another terrible trade.
And I mean, worse for Rockies. Yeah, exactly. But I think St. Louis has one of the better infield cores, at least at the corners with Goldschmidt and Arenado. You have two Gold Glove caliber fielders. You have two MVP candidates who will just be fine for the MVP again. But then you add Wilson Contreras, who out of Chicago, they kind of make their Cubs a little angry. So, and obviously losing Pujols, losing Molina to retirement. I mean, great careers overall for them. So I wish them best of luck in retirement. We'll see them in Cooperstown in 5 years, hands down. I think St. Louis is still that team to beat. They still have the target on their back. I think they'll probably still be that top front runner for the NL Central.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, they're, Paul DeJong, they still got, we talked about Arenado, talked about Goldschmidt, add Wilson Contreras, Pujols retiring. Yeah, they lose that offensive power, but he was obviously at the end of his career, so I don't think losing him is going to be much of a factor. Now, a team that I want to ask you about that I have to give credit to, I suppose, that I despise more than even the Cardinals, and that might change with Wilson Contreras over there. But, Adam, the Chicago Cubs, you know them fairly well. Your partners to the north. And this, again, this is going to hurt me to say this, and I tweeted it out yesterday. God, this sucks. I've liked Adam. I've liked what they've done. I mean, Dansby Swanson, 7 years, 177. Eric Hosmer, not a bad pickup. Drew Smyly, Tucker Barnhart at the catcher position, Gold Glove. Anytime you can add a Gold Glove catcher, I think that's good. Jameson Taillon, old friend of the Milwaukee Brewers, Brad Boxberger, former MVP, whatever he has left to prove on a 1-year deal, Cody Bellinger. It's been a pretty darn good offseason for them, and it pains me, Adam, to say that.
Oh, trust me. I mean, I'm wearing the wrong hat for this discussion right now. I mean, I was hoping the White Sox would have some of these players on them, but I hate the Cubs. I mean, I honestly thought they would be a quiet team over the offseason, but the Ricketts family, I mean, they won another contender. I mean, they had the taste in 2016. Now they want that second championship, and they're hoping it doesn't take another decade, century plus for that second championship to come to Chicago. And the Dansby Swanson train, I actually really like. I think that's probably one of the better signings for them. Eric Hosmer, I'm a little fishy on just because he's on a 1-year kind of loan deal. So,
well, I think a lot they did pretty. I think they're a short pitcher thing. Like a lot of these deals are so Smyly, Barnhart, and I believe Boxberger and we're certain that Bellinger are all 1 or 2 year deals with a mutual option for that second year. So they're not committing long term to anybody. This is a short turnaround if it doesn't work out for them. That's why I like it too.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good, and I think a lot of people overlook these 1-year deals because, granted, you're only bringing in a player for 1 year, but there's a potential that if they have a great year and they love what the system is, they love what the team is doing, they could stay on.
Yeah, it's man, it sucks because when the offseason first started, and I have a lot of Cubs fans that follow me and I follow them, and a lot of them were angry. You saw Trey Turner go. Who else did they want? Bogarts was one that they wanted. They wanted Correa was like the number one on most Cubs fans' wish list. Obviously, that didn't work out for 2 other teams that thought they had to deal with him as well, and he goes back to Minnesota. But I mean, overall, they've had a pretty good offseason. It's been solid. I mean, they established some bullpen, all Gold Glove catcher, still got Kyle Kendricks. You get your shortstop, what you think of the future in Dansby Swanson. I like what they've done. And again, I hate to say that, but it's just been good stuff. We've talked about the Brewers, Adam, their offseason. We've talked about the Cardinals and a little bit of their offseason. We've talked about the Cubs, a little bit of their offseason. I don't want to disrespect my Pirates and Reds fans out there, but Will Myers, on a deal to the Reds. They released Mike Moustakas, former Brewer. There just hasn't been. Brian Reynolds is reportedly on the trading block. I think those 2 teams are in a little bit of a rebuilding phase, so I don't want to discredit them, but I think it's going to come down to one of these 3 teams. You kind of mentioned the Cardinals as being your pick for the National League Central. Do you want to cement that as your pick right now where it stands on the Locked On Brewers podcast to win the NL Central?
I will cement that pick, but I'm not going to say they're going to run with the division. I think it's going to be a dogfight. I think they will clinch within the last 5 days of the season upcoming because I think the Brewers and Cubs will give them a dogfight. And it was a dogfight last year. They did not run away with the division. It was only a 7-game lead when this whole thing was said and done. But I think the Brewers, Cubs, and Cardinals will all be fighting for that division. You may see these teams jockey from first to third within a couple weeks. Each team may share the lead of the division at one point in time in the season.
Yeah, that's a good point because, really the Brewers were running away with that division last year. And for whatever reason under this planet Earth, they traded away the best closer in baseball after going 7-1 after the All-Star break. And that team just completely melted away mentally and physically. So we'll see. I like the Brewers offseason thus far. I'd like to see more. Every Brewers fan, obviously, every fan of any major league team, of any team, really wants to see more. I've liked what they've done. They've addressed some key components of that roster that they needed to. I've really liked what the Cubs have done. I mentioned that. Again, they have to prove that. And the Cardinals are there. They're a solid team. They're as solid as it gets throughout Major League Baseball. But overall, awesome. Great stuff, Adam. Please let the folks know where they can find your work, where they can find you on Twitter. If you're whatever you got going on with your podcast, give me the lowdown there.
Yeah, so you can follow me at Kunos19 on Twitter. You can follow the Bullpen Podcast at the Bullpen Pod. That's THEE Bullpen Pod on Twitter. We tweet out stuff every day. We'll retweet every team content. We'll retweet your podcast as well. Brandon, you're doing a fantastic job with the podcast. Keep up the good work.
Thank you.
We're also going to be covering the World Baseball Classic coming up in March, so we'll be doing a lot of World Baseball.
Wait.
Well, I'm excited for that. I'm going to get my USA gear all prepped, ready to go.
That's one of my favorite. The World Cup is great. And partially, and I'm being biased because we suck at soccer for the most part throughout the world, when you look at the world. But baseball, we have a shot. We have a shot.
So I'll give you a quick story. My wife and I were in England over the Thanksgiving break, and we were in London when the U.S. played London in the World Cup. We went to a pub in downtown London, and it was absolutely fantastic. Even though it was a 1-1 draw, my heart was pounding the entire time, and I want that feeling going into the World Baseball Classic. So we'll definitely be doing a lot of World Baseball Classic coverage. We're going to be doing a division-by-division breakdown starting up next week, starting with the AL West and the defending champions Astros. So please follow the show. Please submit any questions. We'll read them online. And we do shows every Sunday now. We've switched to Sunday evening shows, so we'll be doing right before the Sunday night broadcast when the season comes up.
Smart, because football is nearing its end of completion for their season. So, and for those at home listening or at the gym or driving, I didn't pay Adam to say those nice words, so he means it. I promise you. I'm just kidding. Thank you guys all for making this podcast part of your daily routine. As you know, you can find the Locked On Brewers podcast everywhere you get your podcasts. We are on Twitter at Locked On Brewers. We are on Facebook at Locked On Brewers Podcast. You can follow me on Twitter at Brandon_Snide. Don't forget, we are over there on YouTube. Just search at Locked On Brewers. Thank you for making Locked On Brewers your first listen. For your next listen, please check out the Locked On MLB Prospects. Host Lindsey Crosby is a prospect encyclopedia, and he is going deep on the MLB stars of tomorrow. It is free and available wherever you get your podcast. Coming up on the next episode, I got a lot of positive reaction on this, so we're going to keep it rolling. It is our second edition of the Fan Feature Friday. I'll be joined by 2 other Milwaukee Brewers fans. We're going to hear about their fandom. We're going to chat about anything and everything that we can think of, and we're going to have some fun. And that's what Friday's about. It's about fun. So until next time, as always, stay warm, stay safe, and of course, go Brewers.